let's do this. I want to welcome you to today's program. This is the Compliance Forum 2021, a look back and what lies ahead. We do 4 different forums yearly, and the first 3 are of the Q&A variety. We do a lending one, a deposit one, and then a BSA AML Q&A. Today's version is a little bit different. We do the 4th installment as a look back and what lies ahead as it relates to compliance. So what's gone on this year? More than you'd think. Okay, what's up around the corner? We're going to get that crystal ball out and give you some insight into what may be lurking around the corner when it comes to compliance. Hi there, my name is Jared Moyer, and I'm going to be the presenter for the program today. My teammate, Diane Dean, she'll be in momentarily. She's going to be playing the role of moderator. Today's program is scheduled to go 1 hour. Make certain that you have the materials, the outline, so you can navigate, follow along, and take those notes along the way. Again, the chat function, if you don't have that, if you don't have the outline, is where you can gain access to that. Again, my teammate Mindy will be placing that link in there. Now, Diane, in addition to kind of moderating the program, she's also going to be watching the Q&A button. So those other 3 forums that we do, it's a solid hour of Q&A. Today's a little different. I'm going to be sharing information with you, and then we've set aside about 9-10 minutes at the end of the program. We'll take as many questions as we can during that time frame. Got a couple pre-submitted, but if you want to submit a question for consideration, please feel free to do so using the Q&A button in the Zoom control panel. Diane will be on the other end of those, and she'll be reading them off when we get to that part of the program. All right, with that, let's do this. The program is being recorded today, so if you need to go back and listen to something, share it with a teammate. We'll tell you more about how to get the recording at the conclusion of the program. What I'd like to do is just kind of set the stage for today. So our agenda, we're going to look back at 2021, and maybe you're saying, gosh, did a lot really go on? When we're putting this together through the year, and then we go back and put the cover on and try to figure out how to bring this to you, more than you'd think has gone on in 2021, and likely 2022 is going to be an even busier year than what we had this year. So we're going to look back at the year that was up to this point, and then give you some insight on what the old crystal ball says about what's up there on the horizon, and then we'll end the day with your questions, providing some plain English answers to those. If I have you open up that outline for today's program and start to flip through it, you can see on page letter A and B, we've got some upcoming solutions. We're 2/3 of the way through our virtual compliance conference series. If that's something you've attended, thanks for participating. We've got 1 more leg to go with the BSA AML portion. If you've missed out, you can still get in on it. Those first 2 segments, the deposit and the lending, those are available on demand, and you can purchase the series and then still attend the BSA AML portion live. And remember, whether it's the conference series on page A, the webinars that are out available in our library, whether they're live or on demand, 1 registration gets your whole team in. We don't charge you any extra to have other locations or additional teammates attend the training along the way. So if you get to page number 1 in the materials, and we're going to get right at it. We've got a lot of ground to cover here today. Here's how it's going to go. This is meant to be not so much even an overview. We want to make sure that you were aware of the things that went on, and can you check the box? Did you account for it? Or gosh, we got to go back and take care of that, or we totally missed that. Better look into it. That's what today is about. And then making sure that you're set with what might be lurking up there on the horizon. That's our look back, look ahead. If you're looking for more details on the things that we go through today, the ones that are worthy of additional training, we'd likely have a program out in our library. If you can't find something, give us a call. We'd love to chat with you more about what that solution looks like and where to find it. All right, let's start on page number 1, and let's look back at 2021. We're going to go in chronological order here. The first one is Cfpb. Okay, we have change there. We had a new president, President Biden. He cleaned house at the Cfpb leadership levels. And so we had an acting director, and just recently the new permanent director was sworn in. Here's what I've read so far about kind of where things are at the Cfpb. The watchdog is back, seems to be what you're going to get from reading between the lines. If you remember back when the Cfpb was first put into action, okay, they were billed as a cop on the beat, the consumer watchdog. Okay, they've been laying kind of low under the last couple leadership regimes. Consumer protection is back, and I think it's going to be in a big way. We're just starting to see glimpses of that, and that's why I say 2022, we're going to have some pretty big changes likely on the horizon based on consumer protection and the angles there. The new permanent director was actually part of the original build at the CFPB, and then he went off to do some things with the Federal Trade Commission and is now back. But he was part of the original leadership group, building group with the CFPB. So we anticipate lots of consumer protection coming down the pike. Number two, if you are in the AML profession, okay, there's going to be some rule changes coming. There's the Aml Act, which is really the end of 2020, but it rolled over into 2021. Basically, this is what's going to happen. There's reform, and we'll talk about some of it as we go through here because they've done some things since this act was signed into law. But AML reform is going to be happening. If you're in an AML profession, okay, change is on the horizon. It's also going to be a pretty big impact on banks. So think about resources, think about budgets and things like that as these new regulations by way of this act start to come to fruition. They are on a short / fast track as far as moving here. There's not going to be a lot of time in between the rule rolling out and when you have to comply with it. These are going to be fast track based on what we've read. Number three, if you are a credit union, the CFPB signed a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to enhance and emphasize oversight and supervision in accordance with the CFPB laws and regulations that they have responsibility and oversight for, to ensure that the NCUA is working in tandem and unity with what those rules are. So that's kind of a minor thing, but is something that we do bring to attention when those MOUs are out. So if you're an NCUA covered organization, a credit union, then that's something that you probably need to be aware of. Number four, the role of supervisory guidance. So go something like this. In 2020, they put out a proposal about guidance versus laws and regulation, and basically says that to regulators and to financial institutions that guidance doesn't carry the same weight as a law or regulation. That should go without saying. They put a final rule out to say, all right, that's what we proposed, that's what we've decided. But we got to be careful, okay? There's guidance and there's regulation. Regulation and laws, they have a different effect. But sometimes the guidance shouldn't be disregarded because sometimes it's just trying to restate what the law says anyway. Where it goes beyond the regulation, that's where you have the right to push back. It doesn't carry the full effect. And so make sure you're getting clarity on that when somebody does provide you information on whatever it is that you're doing. Is that the law, or is that just your opinion guidance? Okay, or is it guidance that backs up what the law or regulation states? And the one to be very careful of here is we've got a lot of UDAP guidance out there, especially with respect to things like overdrafts. Okay, that's guidance, but it's guidance that's going to get you in trouble with the UDAP regulations and so forth. And so that's something you want to pay a little closer attention. So it just depends on what kind of guidance it is. But guidance in law, they're supposed to carry different weights, and that's really what number 4 is about. Number 5, Hpml escrow exemption. Not going to spend a lot of time here because I don't think many benefited. The Regulatory Relief Act from a couple of years ago had this thing in it that said, we're going to try to carve out some banks that are required to escrow because of Hpmls and get them out of it. But here's the thing. This rule change didn't replace the previous one. So if you already were not required to escrow for Hpmls, this didn't help you because you're already out. And for those that were looking to get out, if you escrowed for anything other than Hpmls, you couldn't get out anyway because you had the capability and wherewithal to escrow. So a lot about a little here, but that was a February 17th effective date. Number 6, they put out some frequently asked questions on suspicious activity reports. It's careful to note if you read through that paragraph that there's really wasn't meant to be anything new under the sun here. This was really just reminders put together in the form of frequently asked questions. Make sure that those that are responsible for completing suspicious activity reports on your team are aware of the guidance by way of these Q&As that came out. Number 7, Sar Instructions. Now, these are COVID-19 related. They put out some special information about filing instructions and key terms to be utilized when you file a SAR associated with something that is COVID-19 related. Unfortunately, we have seen a lot of fraud and criminal activity related to some of these government programs that were put in place to really help those that were struggling or that have been impacted by COVID-19. Now, when we identify that type of suspicious activity, there's certain information that they want put together in a certain format, and that's really what number 7 is about. So make sure your BSA AML teams are aware of that guidance. Number 8, two different times today, we're going to mention the BSA AML examination manual and updates that were attributed to it. In February, they put together an update that took on 4 different areas. These are more mainstream areas, so this likely hit more as far as who was impacted by these changes than the change that we'll talk about a little bit later on. These areas are more mainstream, so make sure you paid attention to what changed. They weren't nothing major, but you should be aware of those updates along the way if you're the one responsible for BSA AML activity. Number 9 and 10, I'm going to kind of do these together. So 9 is about the revised general QM. 10 is about the season QM. Both of them have a voluntary effective date of March 1st, 2021. Now, these are both final rules. The voluntary effective date is sort of kind of not, and I'll say it that way for this reason. It was voluntary as of 3/1, and it's still voluntary today unless you do secondary market loans. If you do secondary market loans like Fannie and Freddie, I'm going to share with you in a little bit that it was voluntary until July 1st, because at that point you had to start using the new revised general QM because they said no more patch QMs. And the patch QM is the temporary one from back in 2014 that was supposed to disappear. Well, it hasn't disappeared yet. They've kicked that can down the road, but you can't utilize it for secondary market loans anyway. So really, number 9, the impact here is if you're a large creditor that doesn't qualify for the small creditor QMs and you're looking to make an in-house QM, this revised general QM provides an opportunity for you with a lot less red tape. And if this is something that you want more information on, and I know there was a pre-submitted question about this, we have a half-hour and a 1-hour program that dives into all the details on this. Now, as to the season QM that you'll see in number 10, this is a take it or leave it item. And here's the thing, even if you tried to get this today, you don't get it today. 3 years have to pass after you close the loan, and the loan has to have met certain criteria. And then it might just be a general, or it might just be a season QM. The other thing that is, for me, the leave it as opposed to take it is the CFPB, the new leadership group, doesn't even like this. They're not even sure it's going to stick around. So I'm going to quit wasting your time with it. Again, if that's something you want to know more about, there's avenues out there to get information. Number 11, okay, in 2020, the Supreme Court levied a decision that expanded the protected characteristic from a discrimination standpoint as to gender. And they expanded it to be gender identity and sexual orientation. Now, not that you were taking those two things into account anyway when you make credit decisions, but just understand that Reg B was expanded. And that goes along the same lines of everything else we're hearing on fair lending. More emphasis, a closer look at it. And so we want to make sure that we're not taking those things into consideration when you or anyone on your team is making a credit decision. So that was a 2021 court decision that brought to us this Reg B interpretive rule change. The CFPB amended Reg B to expand and align with that Supreme Court decision. Number 12, top of page number 4, you're going to hear about antiquities twice during the program today. So they put out this notice to financial institutions to say, hey, if you notice something suspicious with antiquities trade with respect to your customers, make sure you're filing suspicious activity reports, and they encourage you to do that. If there's some other changes that we'll just kind of hold that for right now that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the program. Number 13, private flood insurance FAQs. Now, before I talk specifically about the private flood FAQs, understand this, that in late 2020, June to be exact, actually mid-2020, they came out with 118 proposed frequently asked questions in general about flood insurance. They're still not final. They added to that in March of 2021, 24 additional private flood insurance FAQs that remain proposed. So together, we've got what, 142, if my math is right, proposed Q&As out there. We thought they'd be final by now. They're not. I anticipate in the very near future they will finalize those. I'm not sure what they're waiting for. But the question that we've been asked often is, so they're just proposed, can we use them? Our understanding from talking to the regulators and some other people in the industry is that these proposed Q&As were just updated to match up with what was really going on in the field as it relates to oversight. And so we believe you can already rely on them for the most part. They just haven't gone through the formal process of being finalized. So that's why they rebranded or reworded some of these. It's not that there's any major changes here. It's just that they needed a fresh take. And so now they got to finish going through that formalized process. Number 14, abusive acts or practices. So in 2020, January to be exact, the CFPB, previous leadership group, put out a statement that said, you know, this abusive thing that the Dodd-Frank Act gave us that we're supposed to deal with, yeah, we're just going to kind of take this loosey-goosey approach to it, and we're going to use common sense. And the short goes like this: if whatever they were looking at that they didn't like was already leaning towards unfair or deceptive, they wouldn't even deal with abusive, because we've already got unfair or deceptive that we can tag this thing with. We don't need to drag abusive into it as well. And unfair and deceptive are Federal Trade Commission, abusive is CFPB, so we'll just keep those things separate. We'll go here, not have to worry about that. And so it's like, nothing to see here. One of the first things that the new leadership group in 2021 at the CFPB put out notice on was that common sense approach. They said, we are going to do away with that. That's no longer our statement. And their new statement is number 14, bottom of page number 4, that the CFPB intends to use its full supervisory enforcement authority when it comes to abusive. Now, good news, bad news. Good news is, I haven't seen them really do anything yet. Bad news, they probably will. Like I said earlier, the consumer watchdog is back on the beat, and the name of the game is consumer protection. And I do believe that abusive, we're going to get to see how they apply that in the next couple of years. So stay tuned on that one. Let's go to page number 5, pandemic flexibility. So that paragraph and this one in the book, during the first few months of the pandemic, the CFPB and other regulatory agencies put out statements to allow some flexibility with respect to regulations and what was expected of financial institutions. They basically granted you some slack, okay, and said, all right, okay, we get you're trying to help people out. If you're not quite riding the line of the rule, we're good. Well, the CFPB pulled that rug back out from underneath everyone in early March. The interesting thing is the other regulatory agencies have not necessarily all pulled out their guidance related to flexibility in the pandemic, because here we are still living through it, right? So my note here that I wrote down is check with your regulatory agency if you have any concerns with what you may or may not be able to do from a flexibility standpoint and those statements. Number 16, this is a warning shot. If you service mortgage loans, I don't care whether you're a large or small servicer, okay, they have put a target on us, our industry. Are we doing all we can to help people as foreclosure looms up there on the horizon? The CFPB is very concerned about what foreclosure looks like as we come out of the pandemic. Now, unfortunately, that's probably a ways off based on what you read in the news today. But at some point, all of these protections and stays as it relates to foreclosure and people being able to stay in their homes even though they can't make ends meet, that's all going to go away. And there's going to be foreclosures. What they want is to make sure that you're doing all you can to help people stay in their homes. If you're a large servicer, there's a lot of red tape you have to follow. If you're a small servicer, you don't have as much red tape, but the name of the game there is unfair, deceptive, or abusive. Make sure you've read and understood paragraph 16 in the book. There's some pretty good warnings in there. Number 17, as part of that Aml reform, they're looking at beneficial ownership. They put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to get questions, some answers to some of the questions they have with how the beneficial ownership rules should be adjusted moving forward. I'm sure you all have some great ideas on that. If you did, hopefully you chimed in with their advance notice of proposed rulemaking and the solicitation to provide feedback. Number 18, top of page number 6, we've kind of already talked about this. This is the April memo that said, hey, if you do Fannie and Freddie loans, the CFPB may have said that the temporary or patch QM is still in play until October 2022, but we're not going to play that way. We've already entered in agreements with other entities, and as of July 1st, if you do secondary market loans that are Fannie or Freddie backed, you must utilize the revised general QM. And there's some work that had to be done there. The big thing was policies and procedures had to be put in place with how you underwrite and price your mortgage loans. But even though that GSE patch is still around, you can't utilize it for those types of transactions. So make certain that you dotted I's and crossed T's there. Number 19, Fair Lending Report. I want you to note the first line directly underneath the heading. In 2021 and beyond, the Bureau will place greater emphasis on fair lending. That is the name of the game moving forward. You want to know what's at the top of the CFPB's list as far as oversight and emphasis? fair lending. And I know, broken record, you've heard others, you've heard us say that every year for like the last 10, right? They're going to bring even more. Okay, you thought that it was a big deal before. They're going to put even greater emphasis on it, and that's not the last time you're going to hear that today. Anyway, they provide an annual report to Congress. Okay, this is the heads up on the version that went out this year. Number 20, the QM effective date. They formally delayed it until October 1st, 2022. They also kicked the temporary QM down the road to that same date. But if you do secondary market loans, like I said, you can't wait that long. You need to already have procedures in place, policies in place to make sure that you're following what's expected by way of that revised general QM. Now, speaking of Fannie Mae, they have long been working on an updated loan application format, new Fannie Mae 1003. So if you do loans that are backed by Fannie Mae or maybe some other government-backed loan that utilizes the Fannie Mae 1003, then the go date for that was May 1st. We've been long waiting for that. May 1st, you had to begin utilizing that new application form. And suffice to say, it's quite a bit lengthier than the previous version. Well, the common question I get is this. What about applications for loans that aren't Fannie or Freddie or some other government agency backed that utilize this form? You can do whatever you want. So your own in-house loans, you can do whatever application you want. Now, it needs to be in line with regulatory requirements. For example, you got to collect race, sex, and ethnicity at the appropriate time. Okay, you've got to get joint intent. But you don't have to use the Fannie Mae 1003 unless it's in accordance with a program that requires it or an investor that requires it. So it's up to you beyond those types of transactions when you utilize it. Page number 7, number 22. Been a long time coming. The Cfpb, and they have oversight over RESPA, and that's where the escrow rules reside. They put out 23 different frequently asked questions about RESPA or about escrow accounts. And I say these have been a long time coming. If you go look at the RESPA escrow rules, okay, that portion of the regulation, it's old, been around a long time, and it's quite thin. So it leaves some things to the imagination, or you're like, well, what are they saying there? Okay, what's that mean? And these Q&As shed some light on some areas that maybe you had questions on in the past. Probably the big one is what you're allowed to do when you do an escrow analysis if they're short or deficient. You have to make sure you follow the strict options in the regulation. And one of the long used, options by way of your systems was to include a lump sum option. Well, that lump sum option is not one that's outlined in the regulation. So even though you may have been doing it that way for years, providing by way of your statements a lump sum option, that's not outlined in the regulation. And the Cfpb called the industry on it and said, no more. It's not in the regulation and you will get written up for this. So the Cfpb is out there writing banks up for it. I have not seen a regulatory exam report outside of what we've heard from the Cfpb that's written it up. I have heard that the FDIC definitely asks. So I don't know if they're asking and giving a heads up and saying, next time we come around, you better not be doing this. But just know that that's part of these Q&As, and it certainly can be utilized by those regulatory agencies to cite the violation for not doing this. That's not guidance. That's a Q&A that backs up what the reg states or maybe doesn't state in this case. Number 23, you're going to see two different references today to the Regulation E disputes and unauthorized transfers. They're getting a lot of attention from the regulators because, frankly, we don't always do a good job with following the rules. It's another regulation that's a little bit older that could use an update, but I'm not sure we really want that update based on the consumer protection that's in play right now. We want to be careful what we ask for here, but in any event, they issued some Q&As to remind people what the regulation states about Reg E and unauthorized transfers. You're going to find, again, this will come up a little later, that they're going to note the issues that they're identifying along the way as well, and we should learn from those mistakes that others have made and ensure that we're not doing the same. Number 24 is the CFPB Spring 2021 agenda. This is almost obsolete at this point because they've mostly checked this list off. What we're looking for now is the fall one is right around the corner. So we anticipate an updated CFPB agenda any time now, and likely most of this will have fallen off or moved into a different stage. And we'll see kind of where this new leadership regime of the CFPB looks to be going in the next 6 months. Page 8, number 25. The FFIEC put out the HMDA 2020 data. Now, the HMDA data is going to be addressed twice during our look back at what's gone on in 2021 in this program. Number 25 just is the announcement that it was released. Here, industry, here's the data that we have. A little bit later on, we're going to say, all right, here's what the data states. But this is just, hey, it's available. Now, I bring it to your attention. You should know what your data says about you before somebody else turns it into a story. So it's always a good idea, once you've gathered your data, put it together, know what might be able to be observed. Okay, what sort of conclusion could I come to as an outsider looking at your data, and then be prepared for those, be prepared to respond accordingly, and then make sure management, the board, knows and understands how it could be perceived, so it's not a surprise to them when somebody does take a look at your data. Because these days we don't know who or when it's being looked at. It's public information. It's electronic out there. They used to have to come to us to get it, and then we'd know whether or not they were asking for it. Now it's a free-for-all. Okay? Anybody can have our data, and we don't even know they're looking at it or doing anything with it until it possibly becomes a news story. Usually these aren't good news stories. It's somebody that's trying to paint us into a corner. Number 26, this is the second round of those BSA AML updates. So I mentioned the first round that they did this year in updating the exam manual was more mainstream, stuff that really was every financial institution needed to do a quick review to make sure that they were in line. This stuff isn't as mainstream. The monetary instruments section obviously is, and that really kind of takes the second bullet out. But those other items, you may not ever deal with those. But if you do, make sure you're up to speed with the latest updates in the exam manual, how they'll look at those items when they do an exam. Number 27. So I mentioned earlier, there was this caution. Hey, servicers, large and small, make sure you're doing all you can to help these borrowers that have been impacted by the pandemic. And they're going to put a magnifying glass on you when they come in and how you handled that. Here's the regulatory update. So they gave you a caution, kind of expectation. Here's the regulatory version of that, the red tape, if you will. Number 27, it included temporary safeguards. Okay, so basically, so it worked like this. Before you could start the foreclosure process, you had to make sure this, that, and the other thing were either completed or were not in process, or you can't start foreclosure. And you have to make sure that you're inquiring as to whether or not somebody has had or is living through a COVID-19 hardship. It's really hard to find someone who hasn't been impacted by COVID-19, even if it's just a little bit. So this is the regulatory red tape that follows on the heels of the warning shot that they gave earlier. And again, this rule, the regulation here, this final rule number 27, is probably more suited towards targeting large servicers, but that doesn't mean small servicers you don't pay attention. While you may not be cited under the regulations, Reg Z and RESPA, based on the red tape, there's still the UDAP angle. So make sure you don't veer too far off course on this. Page number 9, number 28, supervisory highlights. Twice a year, the CFPB puts out highlights. Other regulatory agencies do periodically. I think it's always a good idea to read what your regulator is putting out, even other regulators. Learn from the mistakes of others. Make sure you're not falling into some of the same traps, same issues that others have had to deal with. 3 things in this one stood out to me. They put out some information about what they've been seeing as far as mistakes with unauthorized transfers under Reg E. And so make sure you read up on those to ensure you're not making the same mistakes. They put out some HMDA errors. Make sure you're not making the same HMDA errors. And then one of the more interesting ones that I found in the supervisory highlights here was they brought up TRID owners and lenders title insurance and that oddball calculation that we still have to do today. By the way, that will never change unless we actually have a law, an act of Congress to make that change, because that's actually in the Dodd-Frank Act. It's not something that's by way of the regulation. The regulation had to match up with the law. They can't, their hands are tied. But anyway, they allude to some of the issues with doing that calculation. So that's not something that's out of sight, out of mind. That's very much in the crosshairs when it comes to regulatory exams. Make sure that everyone's on the same page there with that calculation. Number 29, here it is again, though, that Aml Act. So I think it was the second item back on page 1. I said, hey, there's this Aml Act of 2020 that really kind of slid into 2021. AML reform. Well, here in number 29, June of this year, the end of June, they put out kind of this, hey, financial institutions, you're on notice. Okay, there's nothing really to do here, but if you wanted to know where we're going, where is the reform going to take place within the BSA AML area? Look no further than the third paragraph there on page 9 and number 29. Corruption, cybercrime, cybersecurity, terrorist financing, fraud. Fraud's the one that we got a lot of questions about because that brush is broad. What type of anything and everything goes is really what you need to read into that. Transnational criminal organization activity, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and proliferation. All of those are areas that they're going to emphasize when it comes to AML reform based on that AML Act of 2020. And again, a lot of that has to be fast-tracked, okay? And you're going to start to see more of that. There's actually several things that were supposed to have been done by the end of this year. And we haven't heard a ton about what's been going on, but look for things to really start to happen in the next couple months. And we'll close up shop a little bit later today, talking about where you need to be looking, what you should be doing, thinking about when it comes to this stuff. So I'll just kind of leave it there for now. Number 30, Military Lending Act. So nothing new here as far as requirements, but the Cfpb did put out a checklist and a flow chart to help you out. So just some tools that you can add to your toolbox to help you out with Military Lending Act compliance. Page number 10, number 31. This wasn't written to financial institutions, but I think financial institutions need to be aware of what was written to service members so that you can ensure as a financial institution that your awareness level with what your responsibilities are when it comes to a service member and the Service Member Civil Relief Act should be. So if that's not an item, a tool, if you that you've dusted off recently, might be a good job to dust that off and make sure that everybody is where they need to be from an awareness standpoint on what the responsibilities are to service members, specifically active duty service members and their dependents. Number 32, CRA joint agency action. So this kind of comes before another CRA item that we'll talk about a little bit later, but the OCC, the FDIC, and the Fed finally decided to get together and try to rewrite CRA and do some reform. The OCC had kind of done their own thing. The Federal Reserve kind of backed out and was looking at doing their own thing. And the FDIC was kind of left hanging going, I'm not sure what we should do. And they've now got back to the table together to try to take a look at this thing and say, all right, how should we do reform when it comes to CRA to make it so that it's consistent to a certain extent across the industry? So something to stay tuned to as we move forward. Number 33, this is kind of a big deal, yet it's kind of been under the table. So the picture you see on the screen, and you'll also note number 3, I don't have a public link for this because there's not one. This image, this capture here is part of a bigger document that was shared by the FDIC through regional offices with its banks. Now, I have not seen the same thing from the other regulatory agencies, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay attention, because here's what I'm about to share with you. What I'm about to share with you is not new by any means. It's just they're looking a little closer at it. And what we're finding is that everybody, for the most part, has had an oversight on this. So if you read that paragraph, what it's going to tell you is, hey, banks, just a reminder, when you do flood insurance, you do that lesser of calculation, you know, the one that starts with the outstanding principal balance of all loans secured by the collateral, the insurable value, or the maximum amount available, whichever is the least. When you're doing the outstanding principal balance of all loans secured by the collateral, don't just take into account the collateral that directly secures the loan. If you have other loans that you've made, and those loans include cross-collateralization language, any loan that has cross-collateralization language in it and collateral tied to it, that collateral likely passes forward and back to other loans that maybe you didn't think were also secured by the same collateral. Here's what's happening. Let's say today we made a loan that was secured by, let's just say a dwelling that was in a 100-year floodplain. And let's say you required insurance. Let's say it was $100,000. That was your lesser of calculation. And so your borrower got the insurance today. Okay, and the loan was to me. Okay, whether I'm an individual as a consumer, or maybe I'm a sole proprietor, maybe I'm a business, it won't matter. But if that same borrower comes in, let's just say 6 months later. Okay, so remember, previously I came in for this loan secured by this dwelling, okay, and you required flood insurance. Now, 6 months later, I'm in, and you make me a loan for a new pickup truck. And you secure it only with the pickup truck. You're like, we're good to go, right? Let's just say it was a $30,000 pickup. Well, you may think you're only secured by the pickup, but you need to go back and figure out, well, what did that mortgage, what did that deed of trust in connection with the previous loan, what did the language in that state? Here's what we're finding in most commercial, okay, we're not seeing it so much in consumer, but in most consumer mortgages or deeds of trust, there is cross-collateralization language that says that the collateral for this loan also serves as collateral for all future and past debts, or some variation of that. Guess what? That truck loan that you made, okay, now is also secured by that dwelling back here. And that means that you need to redo all of the flood stuff, new determination, new notice, new calculation, increased flood, possibly escrow. All that's in play. So make sure that you understand what your notes, what your security documents all say with regard to cross-collateralization language. The FDIC put all of its banks on notice. And if you haven't noticed, the FDIC also has had an increase in civil money penalties in 2021. I have a hunch a lot of them have to do with this. Now, before I move on from this, I'm going to give you one more item on this. Write down the HMDA effect. This also has an effect on HMDA. Those cross-collateralization clauses, hey, they may also transfer dwellings to future loans that you make, which may or may not need to be HMDA reportable. You didn't mean to take a dwelling, but cross-collateralization may have made it happen, and if you missed it and it's not on your LAR, that's fair game for the examiners. Now, again, this was put out just by the FDIC, but it's true for any regulatory agency listening. It's fair game. Number 34, FDCPA, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. They tried to look at moving the effective date for that updated final rule to January of 2022. They decided not to. They're going to leave it November 30th, 2021. Now, the rule directly impacts those that collect the debts for a third party. So if I collect the debts for somebody else, those debts are subject to this act when I collect them, which means I need to know the rule. But understand there's a lot of chatter in the industry. Even though a lender may not be subject to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, could it be used as the framework to make a UDAP case against any financial institution? The jury's still out on that. We're going to have to wait and see, but just a little thing to tuck into your notes for a later date. Number 35. I mentioned earlier that HMDA data was available. That was the 2020 data available in 2021. Here is the Cfpb's report on what they believe that data states about our industry, the mortgage lending data. Number 36. Oh boy. This was botched. So they added a holiday, okay, which is great. So they added a holiday, but the ramifications of adding that holiday with respect to regulations, like the Truth in Lending Act. The Truth in Lending Act has definitions of what is and is not a business day. And holidays are never business days, but they did this kind of at the last minute. The 17th, okay, I believe, the 17th is the date that the president signed the law stating that June 19th would now be a federal holiday. Well, you could have had Reg Z delay periods already in play, okay, before the president signed that as a holiday on the 17th. So we look to the government and say, all right, what gives? What should we do with these transactions that are already in process? And they were mum. They didn't say a thing. So June 17th, that comes out. It's not until August 5th in the headline here that they finally say, well, here's what you should have done. Well, a lot of good that does now, right? So here's the thing, about 2/3 of the way down in that paragraph, what you're going to find out is if you had a transaction in process where the delay period had already started, whether it's right of rescission or whether it's TRID, okay, then June 19th is not considered a federal holiday. But if that delay period had not yet started on or before the 17th and it started after that, then the 19th is considered a holiday. Now, here's the thing. You can't fix these delay periods. They are what they are, so leave them be. But, you know, could there be an attorney someday down the road that goes and tries to find all these in the country, and if somebody has, you know, not been able to pay or claims the bank's done them wrong, could it be utilized against them? Possibly. I'm not going to lose any sleep over this. I'm not sure you should either, because I think there's also going to be the element of they really botched this and there was no guidance. So that's kind of where we landed on the deal. Number 37, OCC contact information. They updated contact information and let all of you know, hopefully you got the memo, that relative to CRA, FHA, and Reg B notifications, that you were to update your regulatory agency's respective contact information in different regions, if you will. They gave you 90 days to do that from August 5th. Make certain you get that information updated. Page 12, number 38, those of you that offer credit cards, okay, that you have to submit information to the CFPB about those credit card agreements periodically. They have updated some of the technical specifications for submitting those credit card agreements to the CFPB. Make sure you took note of that. Number 39, Fintech. So Fintech is kind of fun, kind of cool. Maybe some of you think, oh, it's risky. Here's the thing, there's a place for this stuff. And the regulatory agencies agree as well. And so they put out a guide to say, hey, here's some information if you're thinking about partnering with a fintech company to deliver, products and services, technology-based to your customers. And so it's not a bad thing. Don't think of technology as being evil and bad. Okay, there's a lot of good that comes from it. Okay? I bet most of you are doing things today from a technology standpoint that if I asked you 20 years ago, 15 years ago, your bank boards and management would say, no, there's no way we'll ever do that. You're doing it now. Okay, and same thing with this fintech stuff that's coming out. These are groups that they're trying to fast track and put together things that technology afford to make lives more efficient and better, if you will. And if you start to enter into some of those discussions, review this documentation. It's going to help you if you check off some of these boxes that are alluded to in the guidance when the examiners, the regulatory agencies come and start asking questions about those relationships you have with those fintech groups. Number 40, Reg B. So this comes by way of the Dodd-Frank Act. So Dodd-Frank Act Section 1071, you've likely heard about that, is going to be a huge change and impact both on financial institutions and the business commercial lending areas within the bank. This is a long time coming. The proposal's out. We've read through it. We've provided some information on it. Here's kind of what it looks like. I'll cover this again in our look ahead, but comments are due by January 6, 2022. Big time impact in your commercial lending departments. They're going to be asked to do things that they've never dreamt of, and they frankly aren't going to like it. And so make sure you go spend some time with them and have some empathy, get some buy-in, let them know what's up ahead, and let them help you chart the course. Okay? That's the buy-in aspect here. This is an opportunity for you all to do some really good demonstrations of your compliance management systems. I'll talk more about that later, but the documentation that you put together to implement a huge project such as this small business lending data collection. Just a misconception or a myth that I want to put to bed. There are some like, oh, this will never happen. No, it's going to happen. This is a long time coming. In fact, there's a California court case that says the CFPB is on a court-appointed timeline to get this thing done. And I'll share more about what we think that looks like here in a few moments. Page number 13, number 41. So we talked about the Federal Reserve, OCC, and FDIC getting together and redoing CRA. The OCC had to formally come out and say we are rescinding, we are canceling our previous rule that we put out, and so they're reverting back to the 1995 CRA rules. So that stuff they'd put out back in 2020 about CRA, it's null and void. Okay, we're back to what we were doing before, and hopefully they'll come together with the collective reform on that at some point. Number 42, the 2022, so not this year's data, but when we flip the calendar over, January 1, 2022, the updated filing instructions guide for 2022 data is already out. In fact, this morning I saw they've done some updates to it already. Evidently, they must have made a mistake or two. Make sure you get yourself up to speed with that FIG. If you get our monthly subscription magazine, we write about these updates annually when they come out, and we do the heavy lifting for you. So that's something that you haven't seen before, and you want to get a sample of our monthly subscription magazine, go ahead and let us know. You can chat that. We'll try to get you hooked up with that. But those of you that do get it, you can look forward to an updated article for that 2022 guide coming your way in the coming months. Number 43. Okay, this comes with a caveat. I don't know where we're at with this right now, but I'm going to let you know about it anyway. So about 3 weeks ago, I was doing a customized training for a group of 4 different banks that are all under the same holding company. And I believe it was there. It was one of the other ones. I'm not sure. But anyway, I was doing a training, and one of the attendees said, and I was teaching about flood determinations, and said, "Hey, you don't have the updated form in your book." And I'm like, "Sure, I do. It's the one with the 2018 expiration date. They haven't updated it." And this lady was like, "No, there's a new one out there." And she sent me a link to a private website that had it, and it had an updated flood determination, but it didn't have a date on it yet. So I got a hold of Diane. Diane's in our program today. Diane did some research on this, and here's where we're at today. It appears that FEMA has updated the flood determination, but it's not final yet, which is why we don't have an expiration date or an OMB number on it. But it looks like we'll soon have a new flood determination. Now, we've been down this road before. Okay, the current expired form that we're still supposed to be using, it came about the same way, okay, back prior to 2018. So we've done this before. So stay tuned. It looks like this new one's going to expire in 2023, but it's not yet out formally. I can tell you the version that you're seeing on the screen, it was really hard for us to come by this. Again, we got it through a private website through a client of ours. You can go to FEMA's website. It talks about it, but I'm not sure you can download it, even though it says you might be able to. Our attempts have been failures every time. So stay tuned on that one. Number 44, this is another FinCEN update, child exploitation guidance. Just your on notice financial institutions, that needs to be part of your suspicious incident observations. If you see that, you need to make sure that you're saying something by way of your suspicious activity reports. Antiquities, here's that notice of proposed rulemaking that I mentioned earlier. This is basically saying if you deal in antiquities, not you financial institutions, but other groups, they're deemed to be financial institutions by way of the Bank Secrecy Act. At least that's what they're proposing, and that they would have some BSA AML responsibilities when it comes to that. If you see something within your walls, though, make sure you're saying something. That was the previous notice that we went through. And in our last item, we went through October 1st, and that's where we cut the materials for our program today. October 1st, we had the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and they put out some FAQs on that. So if you're directly subject to that rule, make sure you're aware of those FAQs. Now, have there been other things? Sure, these are the ones that hit our program for today. If it wasn't on this, it's likely it was a minor item. There also have been some things that have come out since October 1st, and those will be covered at a later date. But that's what we have as far as our look back. Those are the big things. Like I said, probably would be surprised after going through this line by line of all that really has happened in 21. It's been busy, and maybe even busier than you thought it was. With that, let's take a look at what's up there on the horizon. Now, they haven't showed a lot of cards just yet, this new leadership group at the Cfpb, but we're going to start with them and their agenda. So the Cfpb, I mentioned the watchdog, they're back. They didn't really go away, but the emphasis wasn't there. But more consumer protection is what I would pass along to my management teams. I heard somebody, I think this was a video I heard about a week or two ago. Probably was older than that. It was pre-recorded. Anyway, they were talking about the CFPB and the change in leadership, going from the acting director to our newly sworn-in director, Chopra. And they said the consumer protection train, it was on the tracks, has been all year, just kind of putzing along. He said, the person that was doing this video, the gentleman said, the train was on the track, it was moving, but now they're going to throw the coal to it. And it's really going to start chugging. And talking about consumer protection and the emphasis that's going to be placed on it, especially when it comes to things like fair lending. You're going to see major, big time emphasis and increased emphasis. You thought it was a big deal before. Okay, they are going to take it to a new level when it comes to oversight and emphasis placed on and enforcement of fair lending laws and regulations. So make sure that your team's ready, that you're up to the challenge, because you will be challenged with what you're doing when it comes to your compliance management systems and fair lending oversight and within your organization. We'll talk more about just CMS in general here in a moment, but make sure fair lending is on your radar. That Section 1071, the small business data collection, our crystal ball looks like this. We've got the proposal. Comments are due January 6th. Okay. In the proposal, they state that they want to give the industry at least an 18-month preparation period before the mandatory compliance date. Well, if we look at the calendar, we get comments back to the CFPB by January 6th. If they take 3, 4, 5 months to get through those. There's really no reason they cannot have a final rule out before June 1st of 2022. A final rule prior to June 1st, 2022, if you follow the 18-month track to prepare and implement, would put us on course for a January 1, 2024 mandatory compliance date. Now, I know that seems like a ways off. In compliance time, it's not, though. Hey, that's not a long time to get a big project such as this done. So we need to make sure that you're doing some research to study what the rule does, the impact on your organization, getting information to management, starting to chart out a course, putting together an action plan, and documenting things along the way. That's going to go a long ways in demonstrating you've got an effective compliance management system. I mentioned earlier the FinCEN BSA AML rulemaking. There's a lot coming. That's another train that is moving fast and on a very short track. If you're part of the team that's responsible for BSA AML in your organization, changes are coming and they're hot and heavy. Okay, we gave you the priorities. Those are the areas of emphasis. It's not a matter of if, it's when things are going to change from a BSA AML perspective. Make sure that your deck's stacked, that you've got resources and budgets and things ready to roll when those changes start to come in. I'm going to finish up our look ahead here, talking about something that year in and year out is part of our ongoing emphasis, and that is your compliance management systems, your house of compliance. Okay, you should periodically be checking, is our house in order? You should always be working on your house of compliance, making sure that those pillars on which your program is constructed, risk assessments, policies, procedures, training, audit, monitoring, complaints, information, okay, reports, making sure that those things are all in place and that you have a strong foundation, which is a culture of compliance in your organization, and then oversight at the top. Making sure that you're constantly working on that to ensure, one, that you have a structurally sound compliance management system, that number two, that it's effective in doing what it's supposed to. This is a model that you can utilize for a lot of things we talked about today. Okay, take whatever it is that you're looking at, fair lending, BSA, AML, small business lending data collection. Look at these pillars. Is that pillar accounted for with respect to whatever you're doing? We take fair lending. Does the fair lending, is it integrated within our risk assessment and how we handle them? Do we have policies and procedures? Do we have training for fair lending? Do we have audits? Are we monitoring on the fly? Complaints, are we reviewing them for fair lending issues? Are we giving fair lending information up to management and the board? Are they giving us feedback? And if we show that we're doing all this, it absolutely is going to show that we have a foundation that's built on a culture of compliance. That's what I'm talking about with the constant ongoing work on your house of compliance. That's an area, they don't look so much at single violations anymore. They look at this. Do you have a house of compliance that's in order? Is it structurally sound? And is it effective in managing and mitigating risk in your institution? That's another one of the priorities as we look ahead. With that, we've got about 8-9 minutes here left before the promised program ends. I'm going to invite Diane to come in. I know that we've got some pre-submitted questions, and it looks like we've got some that have come in. Let's get it to as many as we can here before we sign off today.
Okay, the first one, do you feel we will see changes to the proposed coverage under the Section 1071 rule?
Yeah, we've got a proposal. There's going to be changes. As far as coverage, they made that bar really low. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go get yourself some 1071 training, because it's more than I have time for here in this Q&A. But they made the bar really low. Why? Because the majority of small businesses are serviced by smaller financial institutions. And if they carve you out as a smaller financial institution, they lose a ton of small business data. So I don't know how much they're going to move that bar. Wouldn't shock me if they move it a little bit, though. We'll have to see.
Okay, to qualified mortgages, could you provide an update to the new QM guidelines and what we need to pay attention to for our portfolio loans?
If you're trying to utilize the revised general QM, whether it's because you want to use it internally because there's less red tape, or because it's what the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac loan requirement is, it's policies and procedures for how you underwrite and price loans. They had to be put in writing, and you need to be following them. That's the biggest takeaway. There's more to it than that, but with our time here, that's what I'll leave it at.
Okay, we'll move on to TRID. We are still having a lot of issues with TRID disclosures, especially when working with title companies. If we fail to disclose a wire fee on the loan estimate that the title company requires, are we correct that it can be added to the closing disclosure and given a 10% tolerance?
Yeah, we get this question all the time. There's actually a comment in section 19E3 that talks about notary fees that is similar to this wire transfer fee and basically says if it's not included, it can still be included as part of the 10% tolerance. And I'll just kind of leave it at that today. But yes, you would be okay with that as long as that's the scenario that plays out. So I'd go take a look at that comment number 2 in 19E3. I think it's double I off the top of my head.
Okay, we have been told that another version of TRID is in the works. Do you know what they are going to change or update?
I've not heard that. That's news to me if it is. So I guess nothing that's hit my radar or our team's radar.
Okay, we have a couple on HMDA, thresholds and reporting. If an institution falls below the closed-end mortgage and open-end loan threshold for each of the prior 2 calendar years, is there any other reason that we should continue to obtain and report the data?
If you're underneath and don't anticipate going over, there's no reason to be keeping that data and doing anything with it, in my opinion. Now, you could. There's this 5-year window that I don't know off the top of my head, but that HMDA alludes to that you could still collect it, but I don't see the need.
Okay, and along those same lines, if we're over for the closed end threshold, but under for the open end threshold, would we then only be required to report closed end, but could we, at our option, also report open end?
You could optionally do HMDA, but then you got to follow the HMDA rules. I wouldn't, but you could.
Okay, this next one takes us to COVID-19 and the CARES Act. Are we expected to have a change control type of log for any and all CARES Act provisions that we're subject to, along with the actions or steps we've taken to address them?
Nothing in any regulation is going to state that you should have done that, but I think it comes highly recommended. We just got done talking about the compliance management systems, your house of compliance, demonstrating how you do compliance, especially when things like a pandemic hits, go a long way in demonstrating how you do compliance. So I can say, yes, I think that it comes highly recommended. I don't know that I can say that it's required, but I can also tell you this. Our team goes into 2 or 3 different banks a week and does reviews. And what we're being told based on some recent examinations is that the regulators want to know what you did right out of the gates. What you did after COVID-19 and the pandemic was more not as unprecedented. Then they want to know what you're doing now, and they want to know what you're preparing to do when we come out of it. And so that's going to show that you're managing, okay, what it is that we're living through. If you haven't thought about it and documented some of that, you're a little bit behind the 8 ball, in my opinion, in your compliance management.
Okay, here's one on Regulation E. With the continued influx of disputes regarding providers such as Cash App, can we send a canned letter stating that these disputes must be taken up with those providers, such as Cash App, not the bank? Or is this not acceptable under Reg E or MasterCard?
Well, forget about MasterCard because we have to deal with Reg E. Reg E is the law that you have to live with your customer. You can't paint the broad brush and just say, hey, any unauthorized transaction with a third-party payment app is meant to go to is the responsibility of the third-party payment app, because if somebody sets up a third-party payment app connection to my bank account with you fraudulently, that is your problem. So you got to be careful you don't paint too broad of a brush here. Most of those third-party apps, if done through a legitimate bank-connected account with a legitimate third-party app account, they aren't probably your problem in most cases. But you can't just paint with a broad brush and say they're all out. No, you can't do that.
Okay, one on Regulation B and the appraisal delivery. I understand we can have borrowers waive the timing requirements within 3 days of closing when there are only clerical errors on the appraisal if they've already received the report. We currently have borrowers sign a form to acknowledge receipt of the appraisal. Can we include a waiver on that acknowledgement to cover us in the case of a clerical error?
You're not going to find explicitly anything that says you can't, but I wouldn't touch it because you can't take people's rights away from them. So including on an acknowledgement that first off isn't required by the regulation, a separate acknowledgement that about the waiving their rights for clerical change, no, don't go there. I think that would look badly on you. And Diane, I have that it's 2 o'clock and we promised these folks an hour, and I know they've got customers to get back to and serve. And let's do this. I've got a few things that I want to send with them as we part today's program. First off, hopefully you kind of know what things have occurred in the past. As we look back in 2021, you've got some information you can take to the board and management on where things look on the horizon. Here's the deal. We're coming right back at you in January on the 25th with the first 2022 version of our forum. This will be the Lending Compliance Forum. We'll take questions for the whole hour. You can start submitting them today. You can get your team registered today for that upcoming Lending Compliance Forum. Now, in closing, first off, there is a survey that popped up behind the scenes. We'd love to get some feedback from all of you. I promise it'll take less than a minute for you to give us some feedback. We're always looking to move from good to great. Please take a moment and do that if you would. Now, the recording to today's session, okay, you're going to get notified of that. We try to turn that in 2 weeks or less, but we're going to do it much quicker. My guess in the next few days, you're going to get something saying that this is ready to go for maybe someone on your team that missed it, or maybe you want to go back and listen to it again. So you'll be notified of that. Do me a favor, when you go and download that in our store, leave us a rating, just like you would an Amazon purchase, an eBay purchase, something like that. That helps people decide whether or not it's something that would be good for them down the road from an on-demand aspect. With that, on behalf of the team here at Bankers Compliance Consulting, we want to thank you for taking an hour out of your time to stop by and make sure that you've got all the I's dotted and T's marked as far as what's come down the pipeline in compliance this year, and you're ready to tackle those challenges as we move forward. With that, we're going to let you all get back to what it is that you do so well, and that's serving your customers. We'll see you again soon.